All right, here we go. Um, the CanAsian Arts Network recognizes and pays respects to the original people of this land. For time immemorial, Indigenous peoples have cared for and stewarded the lands known to many as Canada, so that each one of us today can benefit from all the gifts the land provides. Out of respect for the rights of Indigenous peoples, it is our collective responsibility to critically interrogate colonial histories and their present day implications. We therefore work from the perspective of honoring, protecting, and sustaining the land and the people who were first on this territory to move beyond acknowledgement and into the doing. We recognize the impact of colonial history and structures on our own communities and extend a hand in partnership to those who wish to become an accomplice in dismantling them. My name is Sean C. I'm a father, artist, and community organizer based in Amiskwaci, Waskaekan, known as Edmonton, Treaty 6 territory, and Métis homeland. I'm grateful to be a consultant for the CanAsian Arts Network and helping to host this roundtable today. Thank you to the support from Canada Council for the Arts and Festival Access SZ. The CanAsian Arts Network recently released a series of free artist workshops featuring talented speakers sharing experiences and tips for Asian Canadian artists. Now we're producing a series of roundtable discussions to bring together arts leaders to share learnings and ideas. Make sure to sign up at canasianarts.com to get links to all the online content. For this roundtable, I'm honored to welcome Raisa Lailani, Khosro Berahmandi, and Sophia Wolf. They're all doing amazing work, making space for artists of color, and this roundtable is going to be helpful for those who are starting to or already organizing. We'll learn about the festival organizing they do and the beautiful intersections we all share and see differently in this room. In our journey and goal for CanAsian Arts Network, we're building more opportunities for Asian arts, for the Asian arts community to come together. And we're grateful for everyone here today supporting that and hope it is a generative space for you. We'll start by hearing from each panelist. After the 3 presentations, we'll discuss some key questions around community engaged organizing, and then we'll open up questions to participants. Please leave your camera and microphones muted for this first part as we're being recorded. And if you have any questions along the way, feel free to message me in the chat. All right, Raisa, I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you so much. So as Sean mentioned, my name is Raisa Lalani, and I'm the artistic director of the Prismatic Arts Festival. I just want to start by acknowledging that I'm in Tiohtia'ke in Mi'kmaq, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. And for me, it is such an honor to work and live and share in the cultural lives of the residents of Mi'kmaq. And anytime I'm talking about the land or acknowledging the land, I always take a moment to pause and reflect about nature and the world outside and the land outside and what's happening. And today we've had a very rainy summer here in Halifax in Nova Scotia. And today it was very sunny and it made me feel very sunny. So I just wanted to acknowledge that today. And thank the original stewards and caretakers of this land for allowing us to be here and to enjoy whatever it is we're enjoying. So I will give you a little bit of a introduction about who I am and what I do with Prismatic because it's starting next Friday. So I'm in the exciting festival time. So for those of you who don't know, Prismatic is an annual multidisciplinary arts festival that solely showcases the work of Indigenous artists and artists of color. As I mentioned, we're based here in Tiohtia'ke in Halifax. And we started in 2008, and Prismatic started by our founding director, Shaheen Sayadi, recognizing a need for main stage platforms to really support, Indigenous artists and artists of color, marginalized and unrepresented people on stages. And so he started the festival out of a theater company that was out of the back of a grocery store here. And it's a beautiful story. And I think our founding story is really important to acknowledge. And for context, Shaheen is from Iran. He's Iranian, and he came to Halifax as a mature student at the Fountain School of Performing Arts at Dalhousie University. And after he graduated, there was no opportunities for him. There was nothing. There was no resources. There was no support from community for him to perform and to create, a professional life in the arts. And so he did it for himself. So in doing that, he found that there was a need and a lack specifically in our region for representation on main stages. And I think when I'm thinking about community engaged arts organizing, I think your work experiences and your approaches are very much based on the location you're in. And I think there's some East Coasters on this today as participants. So I'm glad to see that because I can kind of share that perspective with you all. So at Prismatic, we very much prioritize engaging individuals or groups that have traditionally been underrepresented. But that's whether they're performers or audiences. So we seek to take professional artists to community. That's a big facet of who we are. And I think I'm going to be a bit redundant when I say it, especially talking about community engaged arts organizing. We are fully based in community. That is what we do. That is who we are. That has been the inception of our organization, has always been based in community. So I'm going to share a mandate with you, which is kind of structured language, which isn't my favorite, but I think it'll showcase a little bit about who we are. So we are looking to bring new works of leading Indigenous artists and artists of color from across Canada to wide audiences, to create opportunities for the public to engage with and learn about art forms and artistic traditions, to facilitate the professional and artistic development of emerging and professional artists, and to partner with a variety of stakeholders to bring diverse perspectives, experiences, and vision to Prismatic's artistic pursuits and professional development activities. So it's very important to preface that we are here for the artists. We exist to serve artists. We prioritize the artists' voices, making sure they're heard. But by doing this, we are in fact collaborating with community, and we are prioritizing community, and we're serving community and engaging community through the arts. So for me, and I think this is kind of an answer to a later question that's going to come, and I can go through it a little bit more, but essentially to create community engaged art organizations, you first need to determine your why. Why are you doing what you're doing? What is the purpose and what are you trying to serve? And so the mandate that I shared with you and our values as an organization is to provide a platform for professional artists, specifically Indigenous artists and artists of color, to showcase their work and have main stage opportunities. But when you're putting representation on stage, especially with different diverse peoples whose cultures are based in community, you're in turn already engaging the community through your arts organization. So I'll talk a little bit more about your why later, but there's a couple things that I kind of wanted to touch on that I think will be helpful. So they're kind of Prismatic specific examples, very much what we're doing this year to give you kind of a sense of how we're engaging with community. So one of the big things that we're doing this year, and this is something that's taken 2 or 3 years of planning. This isn't something that you just say, I'm going into community and now I'm here for community. It takes stewarding relationships and creating relationships that are really important. But what we're doing is we're going to take one of the theater companies that we're programming at Prismatic this year. Their name is ACPIC Theater. They're based up north. They're led by the incredible Renalta Arluk, who's actually probably upstairs rehearsing right now, which is very cool. And so they created a show called Pawagan Macbeth. Pawagan Macbeth is a Cree retelling of Shakespeare's Macbeth. I'm not in the theater right now, so I can say it. That's good. Whew. No Chris is here. But for her, it's funny. I've been listening to her in person this year, or this week, sorry, about her talking about it, kind of to the media and as it's starting to ramp up. And for her, she was very much like, it's not me retelling the story, it's a takeover of the story. And it's a takeover, with my own culture and with Indigenous people being represented in the stories. And it turns out that she, went to the National Theatre School and studied Shakespeare, but found there were so many similarities between the stories that her family and her community told her that she saw reflected in the story in this kind of westernized canon that they were teaching. And so for her, as we started this conversation about bringing it out here to Prismatic, her most important thing wasn't about having a main stage production at Neptune Theatre, which we are doing because absolutely the story deserves to be told to a wider audience. But the most important thing for her was that she wanted to take this show to communities, to different reservations around Mi'kma'ki, because she's Cree, she's not from Mi'kmaq territory, and she wanted to show her culture, her Cree representation to these different communities, but as well inspire youth, Indigenous youth, to see themselves represented in these stories. So that is something that we talked about doing. So we, had the presentation planned at Prismatic, and then I started to build some bridges that we have been building over years and years at Prismatic with different communities, and we're actually going to be taking it to 4 different reservations. So one's going to be at a high school, one's going to be at a community center, one's going to be at a convention center on one of the reservations, one's going to be at the Friendship Center, and they're going to do the show for a community there. And then we're going to have a feast, because that was something that was really important to her, that she articulated with Indigenous culture and her Cree culture specifically. Feasting with a group of people is really important to them. So for me, that is how my programming is shaped. That's how my curation happens. There's this incredible writer and director who is, really nation renowned. She is a really big name in the arts sector. And for her, the most important thing was creating community. So that's an example of what we're doing this year that's really exciting. Some other things that we've done that we're continuing to do are having partnerships with the Foundation School of Performing Arts here at Dalhousie University. So this is inspiring youth. I know with their university, they're really looking at diversifying their canons that they're teaching, making sure that their student enrollment is also getting diversified. So that's something where we can bring artists that have different stories and different things to share, that, is once again kind of bridging that community gap. We really prioritize youth. So school performances, one that stands out in my mind is Kahawi Dance Company, which is Santi Smith, who is an incredible dancer from Ontario, had a show called The Mushhole. And The Mushhole is a really incredibly powerful show that's about residential schools that actually came out before a lot of the unveiling of students being found in various communities across the nation. And so this was a show that we brought to a high school here, along with, of course, a presentation at Prismatic, where we had 800 students sitting in the auditorium. And it really sparked that conversation. And it was a lot of, non-Indigenous students sitting there as well and asking, what was happening here. And there was, some really tough themes that were talked about in that show that in the artist talk back after they had conversations about. So for us, kind of going back to the overarching, I could go on and on about examples because it's, it is who we are and it's what we do. As I said, it's our mandate, it's our value system, it's why we do what we do. But when it comes to community arts organizing, I think there's a few kind of facets that we keep in mind. So collaboration with communities. So, making sure that community engaged artists are working closely with members of communities or specific groups within that community, like the ACPIC Theater Tour that I talked about. I think there's addressing social issues. Many community engaged arts projects have a social or civic mission. Because, I always say to our audiences that art is used as a tool for advocacy and dialogue and change. And the artists that we are presenting, that's what they're doing. That is what they're doing through their art. Inclusivity, community arts often prioritize inclusivity and seeks to engage diverse voices and perspectives. Again, that is who we are. That is what we do. So it was very interesting, Sean, when you asked me to speak about this topic. I was like, well, I guess I'll just tell you about who we are and what we do. That might be the way to do it. Education and empowerment, community arts organizing frequently involves educational components and teaching participants new skills, providing opportunities like we do with our master classes. Public engagement. And I think one of the things that we're kind of looking at this year, so with our industry series, we have an industry series called Embodied Resonances. And what we're doing is we're giving the artists a chance to talk about who they are, what they're creating, and why they're creating it outside of a colonial framework. Because I think as conversations are shifting now about diversity and about inclusion and equity in art sectors and practices, we're seeing a lot of times where organizations are like, oh, that's an Indigenous artist, I'm going to program them, without knowing who they are, without knowing what their artwork is, and having the expectation that I'm presenting an Indigenous artist, they're going to teach us something, or presenting an Asian artist, or a culturally diverse artist, and saying, well, they're going to teach me something. So we're having a conversation at Prismatic this year that really gives the artist the chance to talk about who they are and what they're doing and why they're doing it, and removing that expectation from kind of a colonial structured organization to say, well, this is our expectation if we're programming diversity. So that is something that, if you're interested in that, or if you're in Halifax or in Nova Scotia, please come down, because I think we really want to see, as I mentioned, we prioritize artists and make sure that those are the voices that are heard. But I think it's really important for organizations and presenters and key stakeholders within the arts sector to come and be involved in that. I feel like I touched on 100 things there because I'm trying to get as much information out, but maybe I'll leave it there. I have no idea what time I did. Sorry, Sean, if I went over. But maybe there'll be more room for discussion after. But those are some pieces that I just felt like sharing with you today. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Raisa. Yeah, I mean, I think the topic of just organizing in general just spans so many topics, and congratulations on everything that you guys have been able to accomplish, from that origin story that you shared to what you guys have now, and really appreciate how you guys are really putting in so much effort into doing those like important cultural intersectional types of bridging work that we know is like so important, especially for folks of color, and understanding our settler positions on how do we be allies and work towards truth and reconciliation. So yeah, thank you so much for everything that you shared. I'm going to turn it over now to Khosro.
Thank you, Sean, and thank you, Raisa, for your wonderful presentation. So my name is Khosro Berahmandi. I'm addressing you from Tiohtia'ke, the unceded land of CanAsian and Mohawk people. I'm very proud to have made the decision to make this land my home, and I hope that with my contribution into it, I can help and respect the work that has been done here to support the land and then the people who were from here, originally from here. I like to mention that I am a painter. I came to Canada in 1983. I left Iran in 1982 during the war between Iran and Iraq. I was about 22 years old, a young person who came here. And I remember I got involved towards the art. I lived in London, Ontario. I was brought to London, Ontario, because my dad, the Canadian government, they had this refugee politics that they would distribute the refugees all over the country. I didn't know where London, Ontario was, but anyhow, it was decided that I lived there. And coming to this country, not having no idea or no connection to the people, to the culture, the very first thing that I felt it was to express myself, and having the problem with the language, not speaking the language. I was looking already as a young person to find an independent language with which I could, sort of hang into and then express myself. And then from that moment, I began to develop an interest towards painting. And then so I began a couple of years after to practice painting, and I went to school and all that. And then so, and I came in, I think it was about 5-6 years later, I came to Montreal, Tiohtia'ke, to see an exhibition. And then I fell in love with the city, and I decided to come back and live here. So this was during the time that I was a student. So when I finished school, I was an artist that wanted to sort of begin to explore the city and then find the ways of presenting my work. And it's from there that I found there are so many difficulties, so many barriers that is hard to overcome and then advance. And it was from that moment that I, just by nature of who I am, I just began to see people like myself that I could, communicate with and connect with. And then, some of them from the Iranian communities, but people from other communities as well. So it was by the nature of being a stranger in the city, I made connection with other strangers like myself. So this is something that I think it was where for us as immigrant communities, we are drawn to ourselves through our communities in order to create connections and to try to grow together and learn from each other. So this was something that it was sort of a part of my life. And we began to work with different community centers in order to help other immigrants who were coming and trying to sort of, create a community together. Through these sort of struggles, I accidentally, was invited to a Turkish wedding in a basement of a church in Montreal in 1996. And there I met Janet Lam, who was the founder of the festival CanAsian. We're sitting around the table and talking, and then we're speaking about, who we are, what we are doing. And then, so when I said I'm from Iran, she said she's running a festival that, presents Asian artists. And I said, I'm Asian. And so we begin to speak about Asia, what is Asia, and all that kind of a thing. So, so I told her I'm Asian as well. And then when we talked about that, she wanted to get to know me more, and then she wanted to come and see my work. And then, so she finally invited me to participate, but at the same time asked me to volunteer. All of this for to say that, we are first generation artists. We came here. I became an artist here in Canada, but some were artists already back home. When they arrived here, they lose all this status. So they have to begin from scratch. And then there was this need of creating a community that we can, sort of together advance and express and present our work. So Festival CanAsian by then had already began to work about a couple of years. And so I got involved, and I, participated in the 1998 program, and I was a volunteer to do the exhibition as well. And from there, my relationship began with the festival, who lasted about 25 years. And I took my retirement last February. So through that 25 years, what I learned as an individual, as who I was, but at the same time with the festival, was that, in order to succeed, to advance, we had to count on each other, and we were already connected to our communities. I was connected to the Iranian communities, the Chinese communities, and other members of the board of the festival, to other parts of other communities. So this community-oriented sort of organization kept its relationship with the different communities throughout this last 28 years of existence, and it was reflected, this relationship, into their programming. So I think what is important, that when we talk about a community-oriented art organization, we have to see how that reflects into the programming, as Reza just explained very well, that how that is reflected in the programming of this festival. It was the same thing with the festival CanAsian as well, but at the same time, being in a province that it was already 2 languages, that there was already a fight over 2 other communities over their own problematics. We get involved as well with the questions of the language and all that. It was so hard to advance. So that's why in order to survive, we have to always go back to the community. And by doing this, we met that there are certain individuals as well, where the contemporary artists that didn't want to be connected with their communities. And then there were communities that, because of what was happening in Asia, and then they were here reflecting those problematics that existed in Asia, they were among themselves, there were problematics and conflicts. So for example, I remember we presented an art exhibition, a visual arts exhibition in, I think it was 2010 or 11, and we were presenting 3 communities that in real Asia, they were in fight. Kurds from Kurdistan, and Turks from Turkey, and Iranian artists. And these 3, they were at the same time in a war in Asia. So bringing these communities together despite the war, and then promoted the friendship and solidarity among them, was also as well a challenge that we have to deal with. So what I'm trying to say about this the time that I have, that this sort of relationship that is important with the community has to express itself through the programming, and that's what we did in festival like CanAsian, and it has been reflected in the mandate as well. The programming we had, throughout the year, we had at that time a festival that lasted for 2 weeks that presented contemporary art, and then we had another festival in July that we presented traditional art. And then later on, when I took over the artistic direction of the festival, I put them together. And then we developed other elements of the festival as well to keep more in touch with the community. We developed a program for the children. We developed a program that to tour the artists within the province of the Quebec. And then another program to tour the artists through the Canada, from which there was a symposium may grow. And then, the On the Move program right now that exists came from that. And we developed international program as well, because there were lots of young generation artists who grew up here in Quebec and wanted to keep in touch with their roots, with their countries of origin. So through this international that we only managed to do 2 of them in Malaysia and in Japan. There was another plan to do in Philippines that because of the COVID stopped. We tried to bring artists from Montreal, Asian artists, and connect them with the country of origin, and do the programming and then do the exchange and bring this conversation with the artists that are coming from that country, how they are perceived from the point of view of the artists from that country, and how they perceive them, and then what is the difference between their experiences and how that reflects in their practice. Anyhow, also saying that the community art organization, for us to express that relationship and keep that relationship was through the programming, and these are all the different aspects. And over the last 4 or 5 years as well, no more than that, 7 years, we developed also another program that was exchanged with the indigenous artists. So the artists from different Asian communities would meet with the indigenous artists and work together to create new work. And that's something that we plan to do it, and we would like to continue to do that. We also had a program to present artists that are handicapped. And so we expand our programming in order to be more involved with the different communities. And we, at the same time, had chosen certain members and active members of different communities and connect with them. And they were like sort of ambassadors of their communities that were, in touch with the festival. Whatever the activities that their communities would do, they would inform us, and then we would try to go and meet with the communities and then be part of their celebration for whatever reason that they were celebrating. So we were all sort of over view of the festival like CanAsian and the programming that tended to sort of connect itself with the different communities. I think my time is up, but I can give more information later in the discussion period. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Khosro. Yeah, I just hearing you speak and just thinking about all the networks and connections that you and Festival CanAsian has, like, yeah, it really is a story about mobilizing like our personal connections, our community connections, and just ensuring that we're, checking in on how we can continue these kind of conversations and these iterative ways of working together and kind of growing together. And so, yeah, I really appreciate your story. And yeah, I'm gonna pass it off to our third speaker, Sophia.
Hello. Thank you so much, Sean, for having me, and so great to hear from the both of you. I will just preface that we now have fire alarm testing happening, and so if I mute myself for a second, then that's just why. Just so that's aware in the room. So yeah, thank you so much for having me, Sean. So excuse me, my name is Sophia Wolf, and I use she, her pronouns, and I am a queer Japanese Canadian independent artist working in dance and film. And I am the founding artistic director and now organizational director of Recorded Movement Society, which hosts an annual festival called Form, or Festival of Recorded Movement. And I am based here in Vancouver on Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh territory. And we're really grateful and honored to be on this land and to be able to screen and gather and share in this community and where we're based. And so, yeah, before I kind of go into the foundings of the festival, I think the story behind it is important and how I kind of came to be. So yeah, I am a graduate of Modus Operandi, which is a dance training program here in Vancouver. And I also recently completed an MA in screen dance at the London Contemporary Dance School, which screen dance, if anyone doesn't know what that is or means or never heard that term before, it's kind of an academic term for dance films or dance on screen. And so, yeah, like I said, my journey into community engaged arts kind of stems from these places and from my own experiences and journeys as an artist. So I'll talk a little bit about that first. So yeah, through my training program through the dance training program that I did, we were very much encouraged to kind of start creating dance films. And this was a very, very self-taught journey. You know, we didn't really have a certain teacher kind of guiding us necessarily. We had some supports, but it was very playful and curious and experimental. And once I came out of that dance program, I started apprenticing for a dance company in town called Company 605, who really saw that creativity in me and encouraged me to kind of continue working on my films. And I always had a camera in the studio and was making edits on the side and just always filming dance. This was a really formative year for me and kind of where my practice of dance and film really kind of came together. I felt like I was like one with the camera and always dancing with the camera. And through the conversations with my mentors, Josh and Lisa, they kind of helped me to notice like a lack of support or spaces for young artists like myself at the time to present these dance films and to kind of figure out where they go next. And there was no spaces in BC, let alone in Canada, who were really screening this medium. And so they really kind of helped me to and see this gap. And of course, as an artist who was making work in that space, I wanted to show things and show people what I was doing. And so they really helped me to create and start the festival. And in creating this presentation and thinking about community engaged arts, I was reflecting a lot about the different layers and nuanced ways that I kind of came into this, as well as personally and professionally, and how I have connected with community through this medium and through dance. And yeah, I just noticed that there was kind of a lot of points that I might speak to that were less obvious to me and maybe less obvious to be in this space. So yeah, I'll speak a little bit to those things. I just wanted to preface that because I think as I was writing it, I was like, oh, there's just so many different layers to the work that we do. And so, yeah, I think the very beginning of creating the festival, we really placed focus. The focus that we had was on supporting youth artists. As I mentioned, as I was a youth at the time, I think I was 22. It was kind of a youth for youth by youth festival, which was supporting artists who were also working in a niche space at the time, in a very niche medium. So we were kind of supporting underrepresented youth voices, as well as supporting artists who are working in a very underrepresented art form. And at the time, Instagram was not what it was today. And TikTok was not a thing. I think YouTube was like the place where people were going to kind of see these works, but there was no space to kind of really gather and to talk about things. And we were all just looking out on the internet on our own and sending links to each other. But there was no kind of community space or gathering to kind of talk and relate and be together to kind of talk about what we were seeing and how we were doing things and to learn from one another. And so, you know, the works that we were seeing that were being submitted to us were this very DIY fashion. You know, people were really using whatever they could get their hands on, different softwares or equipments. And it made for some really exciting and creative pieces. And, you know, at the beginning, well, because as I am a marginalized artist myself, we were also seeing and wanting to support other marginalized artists. And at the very beginning of creating the festival, you know, this was not necessarily a written mandate that was in bold words or even necessarily really highlighted in our statements, but naturally I was kind of surrounding myself with other POCs. And, you know, we were screening and wanted to screen the films that we wanted to see on screen. So we were really bringing that representation to the screen in these ways. And, you know, also the given nature of us having an international call for films, we were also very much receiving like films from all over the world, from different corners of the world. You know, just like very varied cultures and approaches to this already very niche art form that were being seen and shared. And, you know, one of my favorite stories of that first festival is that I think there was a moment where a light bulb kind of went off for me, because we received a film from an artist who's based in Iran. And as we know, Iran in dancing is not a legal action. And so she had kind of, you know, filmed dancing in her own spaces and shot the video and made the edit and sent it to us. And the fact that we were able to see this was just so exciting and really meaningful for her. And I remember writing to her and her just being just so excited that that was a thing she could do. And that was her first realization as well, that, you know, she could really get, she could share her dances finally. And she discovered a medium in which it could kind of get out of her country and be shared with other audiences around the world. So that story was really impactful for me in terms of how much film and movement could really be shared and seen. And so, where am I on my list here? Yeah, and given the nature of the medium as well, there's not often, you know, necessarily narrative stories being shared. It was all very experimental and nonlinear. And I really appreciated that there were many films speaking to these big subject matters and these different themes, but it was very much through an embodied lens. And it really felt like it was, you know, we were allowed to see different points of access. Our audiences were able to have different points of access in terms of understanding, you know, what they were seeing kinesthetically, being able to relate to the experiences of different artists of color who were on the screen and kind of embodying movement in a different kind of, or these themes in different ways. So that was kind of what's been really exciting for me in the ways that I've kind of navigated and held space for artists of color in this space. And then I was also thinking and reflecting about the different programmings that we offer. So we have an international call for short films, and we also commission artists across Canada. And this just means we offer them a small grant of $3,000 towards the creation of a new film, and artists kind of propose different projects to us. And then there's also an educational component that goes with that. So there's direct mentorships that happen and different workshop offerings that support the artists in their filmmaking journeys. And because we are often supporting youth and emerging artists, most of them, it's their first time kind of like creating a dance film or creating film. So there's a lot of, you know, points that are, you know, very new and daunting. I mean, making a film is a really intense and hard process. And so we kind of try to offer these different supports in place as well to kind of give them that extra support. And what I've been noticing kind of over the past few years is that, and also learning and unlearning through the different artists that we support, who are often marginalized artists, is that, you know, I've been really having to listen and follow the artists and their paths rather than assuming what they need. And, that, we're really responding to what comes up for them. And what we've noticed over the years, especially through the pandemic years, is that, the support that they need is not usually even technical or artistic or, like skill based. It's a lot of the times it's like around like mental health support or conflict resolution or finding different ways of collaborative care when it comes to navigating the very complex, collaborative, creative process that film is. And often these artists are speaking to and tending to very vulnerable parts of themselves, speaking to like the journey of like a family member passing, or speaking to the different ways in which their bodies have been oppressed. And so what has been my role and journey in this is to kind of, just like find different ways to allocate support and money towards spaces or those areas of their processes that are not necessarily about getting a film off the floor. Actually, often times, that the stipulation is that we give them the grants and that they undergo this process, we support them, and then there's a presentation at the end. But there's been so many times where having that presentation at the end is not possible because of things that come up in their lives, or different, there's just different factors that come into play that make it so that it's hard for them to finalize a piece. And for us, it's not about the final work, it's really about the creative, practice, or the process over product. And so I think that's where my brain has been going to, and just really wanting to not worry about the like capitalistic nature of just like make the work and we're going to share it and it's going to be great, but that the process and the practice of like supporting these leaders in their own communities, because often when we're making films, we access our own communities and we access the people around us. And so in a way, it feels like we're kind of supporting the leaders of those projects in their communities. And so it's just become a very nuanced and different approach than it had been in the first few years of maybe more skill-based things. And of course, those things are important. But another thing that I'm noticing the longer that I do this is that there's other ways that I think especially marginalized communities are needing in terms of being able to even start to create their work and to imagine or to have the space to dream up projects. So it feels like I'm trying to go back to the beginning a little bit now and to kind of reframe or reshape the ways that support can look like, or how other ways that we can support artists in these spaces. So yeah, I'll leave it at that for now, but I'm sure there's so much more else to talk about as we continue. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sophia. I think you just very eloquently kind of got a lot of the juices flowing for the first question that I really had. And I think I can kind of open this up for actually everyone else in the room. If you are an organizer, if you are someone that or thinking about organizing, do feel free to like put in the chat something that you find really challenging as an organizer, something that you think is really missing, like some sort of gap. I really love, Sophia, how you said you kind of go back to the beginning, because I think as an organizer myself, there's a lot of this iterative process of like checking in and like, did we do what we wanted to do? Like, did we accomplish some of those goals and those missions of serving our community? And it seems like, especially if you're running something that is an event-based, there's always and will always be like gaps and things to shift, because our world is constantly changing and the things that we face are constantly changing. So how are we responsive to those things? And so I wanted to kind of pass it to Raisa and Khosro to maybe name some of those things that, earlier we were talking about a lot of the a lot of the origin stories of these festivals were based around feeling underrepresented or having no space. But it's very encouraging and inspiring to hear that everyone in this room were able to like make space and start creating space for community. And so now that we're kind of in this space, I would even say this for like the Asian arts organizers, is that we can get there, but are there now like more complex challenges that we know we want to focus on as marginalized folks or as racialized folks? Raisa, do you have a feeling on that?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I think that question has always and will always fuel kind of our curation and themes for our festival, specifically like what I was talking about for this year, with our themed embodied resonances. So I think as conversations shift towards, I think I'm kind of touching on the community arts organizing aspect, but also just marginalized artists in general. I think there is an expectation on how artists are meant to showcase their work from a colonial perspective. So for us, it was very much identifying, we wanted to reflect or have the artists reflect on how their relationships to their own bodies inform the art that they create and seek what they want to put into the world. I think that was really important to us. We wanted to kind of shift the consumption and the discourse surrounding the work of Indigenous artists and artists of color and Asian artists, so that they can create and share the work that's representative and exploratory of their own ideas and artistic visions. So, we could touch on or talk about color casting, we can touch on tokenizing presentations, things like that. But I think kind of trying to bridge it back to the concept of community arts organizing, I think it comes back down, and this is where I kind of articulated that question of your why. Like, why are you doing what you were doing? And I think that is always going to divulge what the challenges are in the present day. I mean, we can talk about challenges of arts funding. We can talk about challenges of building relationships with communities. We can talk about challenges of how artists that are marginalized are being presented and represented on main stage. I think there's always going to be an uptake of challenges that we kind of have to, identify within our own work. But I think when you kind of ground yourself back to community and ground yourself back to the intention of what you're doing, why you're doing it, I think that's a way to start mitigating challenges, or at least start taking actionable steps towards it. And I think that's something, that I think we've seen, which is ironic because we're on a Zoom panel right now, but that is something that we've seen in the last, 2 to 3 years, especially during the pandemic, is people have sat and they have talked and they have articulated their feelings, and, voices have been out there. And I think the arts sector is really kind of a leader in, making sure that there are diverse identities and voices being heard. And I think that's something that for me was like, even looking at my industry series, I was like, I don't want to talk anymore. I don't want to sit and talk about our problems. What are we going to do to address these problems? What are we going to do to actually start putting actionable outcomes on these challenges that we have identified and have talked about? Because there's always going to be those challenges. So I think, for us, and I think for everyone on this panel who is doing that work and, really focusing and presenting the work of people of color, I think it's staying ahead of the curve and staying ahead of those conversations and really like listening on the ground to what's going on with the artists to make sure that we have to be the leaders. We have to be the leaders for those artists so that other organizations can see what we're doing and understand the best, most respectful way to do what they need to be doing. So maybe I'll leave it at that for now.
Khosro, do you have any thing that you want to share?
Sure. I mean, the challenges are endless, so I don't know where to begin. But I guess as an individual, when I wanted to begin to present my work, I had to sort of, lean on other people, and then become a group in order to. We had to put our forces together, and then to advance. And we live in a society that, when I'm talking about last century, like about 28 years ago, when in Montreal we wanted to present and contemporary Asian artists who plays a traditional instrument that was not known. People would react to ours. I said, this is traditional music, this is folkloric music, this is that, this is not contemporary. I mean, you have to deal with all these sort of, challenges in order to be able to present an artist. And then besides, when as an art organization, when you began to work, I mean, we were all artists ourselves, the people who ran the festival, the very first generation, we were all the artists who, had to work doing other things. I used to work in restaurants or whatever, and then other people had other jobs, and then they had to work voluntarily in the evenings, and then they have to sort of present and create. So there was all these sort of challenges, and then so when we became an organization, we wanted to sort of help each other to go farther. The perception that existed was that especially from the point of view of the founders, that the festival CanAsian, for example, is a presenter. So when I had an artist to present and just arrived in Canada, has come from a country who was escaping from a war and this and that, with a family, and then losing everything, beginning from scratch, then you have to prepare a website, a CV, and all in 2 languages, because there's 2 languages. And then you, as an art organization, you are spending a lot of time and energy to helping this artist to create this presentation, to be able then to go somewhere, say I want to present this artist. So you have to do all this work in advance, and then you go talk to your funders and say I'm doing this, and say this is not your job. Your job is to present. I say, yes, I know I have to present, but this person needs to pass through these stages in order to be able to present. So they said, no, the money that you get is just for presentation. If you want to support this artist, that you have to create another organization, which is a service organization, that its mandate is, it's just more and more, when you want to go farther, just more and more challenges come up. And then again, when you are doing working with the communities and then working with lots of volunteers, what happens is that 2 weeks away from your presentation time, somebody gets sick or someone comes up, the volunteers won't be able to show up. The contradiction between being a structured organization with established team that is working with the specific tasks, and working with the community, with volunteers. These are all, it just becomes so specific to us that nobody else knows about it. I was talking to you earlier before the meeting begins, that, for example, recently, from what we hear, is that the emergency funds that were given to Canada Council to support the artists are finished now. The applications, the amount of applications has doubled since the pandemic. And then now Canada Council has the same amount of money that they used to have before the pandemic. So how are we going to deal with all this? With all these, in Montreal, we know through the festival CanAsian, we got to know 30 artists whose applications were refused. There are some of these artists are scheduled to present their works during the autumn. So they have to go, they have plan to show their show, but they have no funding. So all this for say is how to manage to make this sort of professional structure, according to Canada Council or to the system out there, that you are able to deal with this, and then at the same time work with your community. So you end up being something which doesn't fit to any of these sort of descriptions and these boxes. So to make this sort of balance between these two, I think that it's a work of art, and this is where you count on your community, because the community comes out and supports you when you need that, and also this sense of solidarity and sense of sort of pride of what we are doing is very important. And I think one of our main reasons for which we have succeeded over this last 20-something years was that we always counted on the community, and they were present when we needed them the most. But again, another main problem I mentioned is in another meeting, that now we are the festival CanAsian is 28 years old and is presenting artists that are younger than the festival's sort of age. So that means that now there's a new generation is coming, which is very, very pleasing, and to know that these young people that when you were working as a volunteer, they were babies, and now they are presenting their artwork within your festival is fantastic. But again, you have to do a lot of work with this young generation to just remind them how these structures come to exist, and how much work has been put into this voluntarily with people who sacrifice their time and their life. So is a constant work, continuous work with so many aspects to it that you cannot reduce it to one or two or three challenge or problems. So I just throw a few of them out there, but there are so many others. But these are not to discourage, it's just to remember that we will succeed together. 10 years ago, we did not have this CanAsian art network, and now we are able to sit across the country and talk about it. So this is this is a privilege that we have now. And then I'm sure with working together, further, we could convince that, the art organizations that they deal with the diversity, they need extra funds to, for example, framework their artists who just arrived here in Canada and they need help, So I cannot send an artist comes to me and say, go get your CV down and then come back. I cannot do that. And I have to convince the funders that this is part of my job now, that if for a white art organization, it's not their job because the artists are from here, they grown up here, they know how to do all that, and they have gone to school and all that. But for me, an immigrant comes from elsewhere, comes from war zone, whatever, and lost everything, come here, wants to work and needs to be supported through that. So these are the little challenges I just threw out there, but the solution is being together.
Thank you so much, Khosro. I think sometimes as I'm an artist as well, and I wish I could just talk about art all day, every day, but the reality of trying to do this work is very administrative, and there's a lot that we as organizers have to navigate in terms of the structures that are provided for us. If you like it or not, it's still, there's so much that we have to kind of shift to suit something to be sustainable. And so I really hear a lot of that, and that part of what you've experienced, Khosro, and obviously any organization that has official kind of an organizational status, they're constantly trying to manage how to sustain it, right? And so my next question is actually kind of more centered around folks that are thinking about or have created something that has been continuous from more of a grassroots level. And what are some of the clues into why you should move from a grassroots or a collective setup to start thinking, well, maybe this is something that we have a good reason to become an organizational entity. And so kind of just opening that up too, because I think that's such an important thing for people to understand, what you're talking about, Khosro, there's this mediation that ends up happening between community work, which is often grassroots, very volunteer based, to this next stage of officially having a board and having an organization, and then having a group around you that's we are committed to making this work and for generations or whatnot, right? And so I'm sure that people are that are starting anything would love to see that dream kind of comes true. And so I would love to kind of open that up in terms of just things or points of being this is one thing to really think about to go to that next stage of making that really an organization essentially, or a festival organization or something more official.
I guess I can hop in for a second.
A big
I
question.
mean, It is a good question. And I mean, I think for us, that is kind of the question that was posed when we started becoming who we are. But I think it was the identification, and I think that's a big difference for us. So with Prismatic, we present the work of professional artists. So these are people who have decided and said, okay, we are going to be artists. That is how we're going to make our daily living. That is who we are. And so, for us, it was not negotiable. Artists need to be paid. They need to be paid well above industry standard. They deserve main stage opportunities. So, I think it was a natural course of progression for our organization because of who we are and what we were doing. But I think you kind of touched on it for a community organization that's looking for that. It is a fight as a not-for-profit organization trying to acquire funding, trying to have that administrative ability to do it, writing grants. That's a lot of work. That's hard. That's not easy to do. And you might fail. Like Khosro, you were talking about the fact that there's so many applications coming in now. So I think it's something that you need to, I wouldn't want to say don't do it, because I think it's important to do it. And I think there's a lot of organizations that should and need to do it. But I think it's just having a really good understanding of what that means. And finding a way to make it feasible to do it. So for example, as an organization, when we apply for a project grant, we might have operational funding, but we want to go to this community tour. Well, if you don't get that $30,000 project grant you applied for, then what? Are you going to do the tour? Are you not going to do the tour? What is your backup plan? So I think it's just having kind of that overarching lens of reality on top of it. But still, I think we need that passion, we need that fire, and we need those people to take those chances to make these opportunities happen. I think that's really important. So maybe that's looking at partnerships. Maybe that's finding those who have the resources and knocking on the door and saying, hey, Colonial Theatre, you haven't let me in for 100 years. Here's your chance. I'm here. I have good work. Present me. I think there's other ways that can be looked at for doing it as well. But I would love to hear your other opinions, Khosro and Sophia.
Oh, it's a hard question. I think maybe I can just speak to experience. So the way that the festival was founded, it was actually incubated through the organization that I was working with. So through Company 605, who I was dancing for at the time in that internship, it was kind of founded through them, and they were an established organization. And because they were an established organization, we were able to access a different grant that was, through the festival was a project of 605 at the time. And then after 2 years of being successful, having successful funding from that organization, we were hitting a little bit of a block in terms of other grants that we were able to access, because that organization was already accessing those grants for their own projects that we couldn't apply to those because they were already taken for their fiscal year. And so that's kind of, I feel very grateful and lucky for that kind of progression that we had. And I think I would encourage folks to explore opportunities like that before becoming that organization on its own, because it is so much work. It's really a lot of work. And our organization is primarily made of working artists, and none of us are full-time. We're all gigging, we're all taking jobs outside of making the festival happen. And I'm feeling like the burnout of that. We're all feeling the burnout of that. And and that's what's so great about our organization now, is that we are all artists and we're all in the scene and we're all making our own stuff, and that informs the work we do at the festival. But at the same time, it's very difficult. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. And so, so just to go back to the kind of progression. So yeah, it was after 2 festivals that we were successful in funding that we decided that we needed to access, if we were going to grow the thing, we needed to create our own organization so that we could access the grants, the bigger grants that we weren't able to under the umbrella of the other organization. And that is also, to preface, it does take time. Like, I don't know if the rules have changed since, it's been a while, but, I think it's after 2 years of being an established organization that you can start to access Canada Council funding. And, for other councils, it's like 6 months or another year to kind of before you're able to start. So that is also takes time and process. And, only now, actually this year, we've finally been able to receive charitable status. So that's like another step or another place of access to be able to access different kinds of funding. And so, yeah, I think with my journey in this, it's been a bit of like, the thing has grown faster than I can keep up with. And the capacity piece is really huge. Like, speaking of challenges, like, yeah, I think burnout is huge. And as arts and culture is growing in Canada, as things are getting bigger, like we're saying, like, or Canada Council has the same amount of money, but there's just so much happening and people are asking for more money and inflation, and everyone needs more and more and more. And so the spaces or the opportunities for those, new organizations that are coming in are maybe at the beginning a little bit harder to access because you're just starting out and establishing. So yeah, I would really ask a lot of questions and talk to a lot of people, talk to established organizations, talk to different kinds of organizations, organizations that are artist-led, organizations that are not. And because I think that's something that, a lot of audiences or folks who come to these festivals just don't see and don't hear about and don't understand. And it's huge. Like, it takes a massive amount of work and energy on the folks on the end of who are making it happen. And so, again, like Raisa, I wouldn't discourage you, but I would really just ask a lot of questions and perhaps start to find other collectives or organizations that you can start to partner with or pair up with, or, see what can happen. Is there really actually need for this? Maybe we should start it as a project first and see if it works and what happens, and learn from that first before kind of moving forward into the next step. Because yeah, it's a lot of work. And then board of directors gets in, and then there's other complications, and there's just a lot to navigate. And so ask the questions, ask the folks around you, and yeah, go from there.
Yeah, thank you, Sophie. For me, I think it's a very contradictory questions. Whether you want to do it or not is sort of personal, but as an organization, when you have a mandate and in order to sort of advance and respond to the mandate, then you need an organization which is, structured and sustainable and can sort of, provide the services that we need. So for me, for the Festival XYZ experience, I remember when we began to work for many, many, many years, I think until 2006 or 7 years, our revenue was based on doing an application, waiting to know whether we received the funding or not. And the funding would come in March, and the festival is the month of May, Asian Heritage Month. So we have only 2 months to prepare for the activities of the festival, but we could not wait until March and then get the response and then do the programming. So we have to do everything in advance, whether it would happen or not, whether we receive the funding or not. We had to go ahead and prepare and just wait and wait. And this is like a major anxiety because you never know what happens. And then for many years, we used to work from our homes, from, in the cafes, in our apartments and all that. But there was a moment that we have so much material that we could not even keep them in our apartments. So we needed to rent a, smaller space as an office. So I mean, it was necessary to create a structure because other than that, we could not survive. And then when we go towards creating the structure, then we have all these problems, for example, what I just mentioned, that waiting. So I guess we have to sort of balance these both sort of aspects and to see whether it is necessary or not. We came to this conclusion that, in order to survive, we had to push and go further and then create the organization. Once the organization was created, we received funding for functioning as well, which was very little at the time and was only federal. We did not receive anything from the city of Montreal, from the city council, and neither from the Quebec Art Council. So we had only one revenue, and then we just had to, I remember until 2012, Janet Lam, the artistic director of the festival, worked as volunteer, and that's never heard of, for such a long time. You work as a volunteer and then to run a festival, and she was really working a lot, putting a lot of hours in it. I was hired as a part-time, but I had to work full-time. I mean, those kind of sort of, circumstances were there, but knowing the fact that we need a structure in order to be able to continue helped us and pushed us to go and then step by step, for many, many years, we used to hire people for the periods of 6 months because there were grants available for only 6 months to support one worker. And then, we're just doing this over and over and over. It was so tiring. But as the time went by, there were so many other struggles at the same time parallel to that. There was other organizations like Stamp Firm, Stamp Hall, that were pushing the Canada Council in order to provide more funding. The situation changed as well, but I think in order to continue, because in the end, we are competing with so many other art organizations, there's a deadline of Canada Council, they receive, about 70, 80 grant applications, and, they pick the best. So you have to be among those sort of, very, very, very highly good recommended applications. So we have no choice. In order to do that, we need to structure ourselves and to do the structure. And once there is a step and you pass that, I think it becomes easier once, an organization has a, art director and a, general manager, then together they can work, and there's a support of the board, then they can go further and then expand. But I think in order to be able to do what we wish to do, we really do need to have a very competitive, very well-structured art organization who can compete with others. Other than that, they will push us aside. And then this little voice that we have, we're gonna lose that as well. So it's important to push for it, I think.
Thanks so much, Khosro. I see a clap. Yeah, I mean, I just to kind of add to that question, or to that, I think I have a lot of criticisms, and I had a lot of resistance, more from like entering as an artist to understand the structure. And it was a tough, and it still is, it's something that I struggle with, having to play the game, especially when we know that it's like actively potentially perpetuating colonialism or things that do not sit well with our values. And so do give yourself, as an organizer, that grace, because there's a lot of contradictions to the work, right? Like, you're trying to build a structure to help people, but that could also, in hindsight, also have harmful effects as well, right? So what in this are you, in many ways, like, willing to do, and stick to, the core of where your heart is, right? As a way to kind of like make sure, we hear about the burnout, we hear about, having to hold space for community. So yeah, like, I think that's been my guiding star in terms of like even the CanAsian Arts Network. It's like, there's so many ups and downs of trying to kind of push through and do this work. But yeah, like, at the end of the day, it doesn't serve you if you don't understand what the structure is. And so the more you get to know it and the more you have an idea of how well-established institutions that have been here for 100 years have been able to survive, the better you'll have to understanding what the system considers a, legitimate entity. You know what I mean? And so, yeah, it's a interesting, but I think just like one of those realities that I've had to kind of constantly kind of navigate. I wanted to open it up for folks who are joining us to ask a question. Of course, if you're, I have a billion questions, so I'm happy to kind of ask. But if anyone wants to raise their hand or put it in the chat, feel free to. If not, and if I don't see anything, I did kind of want to ask something that might be a little joyful or more joyful. Like it's so much work or like grinding. I wanted to kind of ask and some of you already in your presentation already expressed or shared some like really amazing work that I'm really excited to go check out. But is there something that you are connected to in community that you're just so excited to share? Like something that you're connected to and organizing, do feel, I would love to hear.
I'll go because, it's fresh in my brain. So one thing that we're presenting at Prismatic this year is a ballet called Pisuwin, Pisuwin. And it was created by actually Atlantic Ballet, but it was created by a producer named Pizzazz and Paul from the Wolastoqiyik First Nation, as well as composed by the music of Jeremy Dutcher, who's also from New Brunswick as well. And so this is like a really exciting thing to see, especially in our region on the East Coast, is this big colonial entity, as in Atlantic Ballet of Canada, I think is their official name. They gave space. They made space for Indigenous artists to come in and to tell their stories. And it's the first, from what I understand, they're saying it's the first Wolastoqiyik ballet ever, but I think it's the first like Indigenous storytelling ballet ever. But don't quote me on that because I don't want to get that wrong, but I know it is one of the firsts for sure. And we're presenting it at Prismatic, and we're the only place in Nova Scotia, so we're the Nova Scotia premiere. It had a premiere in New Brunswick and did a little tour in May when it started, and we're the only show in Nova Scotia that's taking place, which is really exciting. But I think the thing that was the most exciting, outside of the fact that it's the coolest ballet ever and I got to see it and I'm so jonesed about it. But I think the thing that's really exciting about it is, we've put so much work in building relationships with community here, specifically Mi'kmaq communities, and the amount of people that came to us first before we kind of reached out to them to be like, oh, Prismatic, we've heard of you, we know about you, listen, you're bringing this show, like we want to bring 30 people from the Circle of Sisters, or we want to bring 30 people from the Wabanaki Labrador Network. And I'm like, yep, free tickets for you, free tickets for you, free tickets for you. And it's kind of put into real practice the hard work and the stewarding and the relationship building that we've done. It's coming to fruition, and it's really beautiful to see people feel like they're represented on one of the biggest stages in Halifax. Actually, I think it is the biggest dance stage in Halifax. And they're excited to come and they want to bring their community. And, people are asking like, hey, we need hotels. We're coming from the reserve 5 hours away. How do we get there? And so we're able to do that. So for me, I think that is something where it's just like the fuel to remind us this is what we do, why we do what we do. So, yeah.
Khosro or Sophia, anything that just like makes you think of a lot of joy that you're kind of connected to in terms of artistic work right now?
Shall I go? Yeah, for me, been such a long time I've been with the festival. There are so many things that comes to my mind. Just being part of the team, it was just very joyful for the work that we do. But I guess there are two elements that I wanted to talk to you briefly about it, because I think it's very specific that the festival does, and that came throughout the pandemic. That was a major all over Canada in Western countries, the anti-Asian hate and racism that grew very fast during the very first few months of the pandemic. And then we received so many, because of the relationship we have with the communities, a lot of calls came to us that, what are you going about this? Not even that, even the media called us and said, what are your positioning, what are you going to do about all that? So that is where we felt that we have, besides what we do as the art, presentation of art, we have a social sort of, responsibility as well, and that's related to our community characteristic. So we created a new program that is an anti-racism program that happens during the month of March. The third week of the March is a week of anti-racism activities in Quebec. And this is just before our events happening in the month of May. So this year was the second year that we programmed this activity. And the very first year, it was a huge turnout because it was right in the middle of the pandemic. Second year as well, it was very, very interesting programming, but we added a sort of a celebration into it. So this the last day of the week, we created a huge party with the young artist DJs that they prepared a very beautiful night. With Asian food available and everything. So it was like a dancing party, lasted until 3 o'clock in the morning. But it was at the same time to do our social sort of responsibility, fighting with the racism through the voices of the artists, but at the same time do a celebration of all of us being together here and fighting this back. So it was very, very important thing. And another thing that I'd like to mention is that we do this program that bring Asian artists to different parts of the Quebec province. And last couple of years, we brought two communities that are not very well known in Quebec, the Mongolian communities and Tibetan communities. And we did their presentation through the culinary art. So this last August, late August, we went to Gaspésie, which is about 14 hours drive from Montreal. We were about maybe 10 people from Mongolian community. They came with 2 cars, and then they did a huge celebration of their culture, making food, eating with people, showing them how to make it, and then just being with the public. For many of the people who were in the cell, was the first time they had the very first contact with the Mongolian community. For Mongolians as well, it was an amazing time to talk about their art and culture and present it in such a faraway lands that they, had never thought of it, when they moved here. So it was a very joyful moment. And this was the same thing, a very, very good positive response, both from the public and from the community, Mongolian and Tibetan community over the last couple of years. Very joyful.
There's a few things that come to mind. So I've shifted this year to being what I've coined myself as the organizational director. So I've taken myself out of the artistic director position and passed it down to my colleague Tamar Tabori. And so I actually don't know I have some sense of what's being programmed, but it's very new for me to not really be a part of that conversation. And so I'm just looking forward to seeing what they've done and to gathering at the festival again this year. That last year was the first year after the pandemic that we got back together in person, and that was really, it reminded us about why we do this in public spaces and why it's important to gather and to be in community. So I'm just looking forward to that. Our festival is in November, and for those folks who are here and want to access the festival, it's a hybrid festival, so we have all of our films available online as well. So I'm excited about that, but also in being in this kind of newer position, being a bit more of like a bird's eye view on the organization as a whole. I've also been excited about just thinking about different organizational structures and how leadership change can be stewarded as part of the organization. So because, I grew up with the festival. I was like youth at the time, and now kind of aging out of the youth category a little bit. And so I've been trying to kind of create a system or a structure where different, that I'm now passing it down to my colleague, and that eventually she'll pass it down, and that there's kind of a new ways of kind of having different leadership at the forefront of the festival every few years, and how that can happen internally. So I'm thinking a lot internally as an organization, like how there can just be different or creative approaches and ways to have different leaders at the forefront and different creative voices at the forefront. And so that's been something that's been intriguing and exciting for me to kind of start to think about and to explore.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah, we hit our time. I just really appreciate everyone's input, and I want to thank again Raisa, Khosro, and Sophia for joining us today. You can find out more about their work in the event description where you registered, and you can also check out their profiles on our digital platform at www.canasianarts.com. We're really grateful to have the support of Canada Council for the Arts and Festival Access SZ to making this CanAsian Arts Network project possible. If you are an Asian Canadian artist looking for more support, visibility, and community connection, we'd love to invite you to join the free network and follow us on our social media platforms. We hope this roundtable discussion has been helpful for your artistic journey, and thank you so much for coming, and take care.
Thank you so much, Sean.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sean. Thank you, everybody.